Hi, my name is Zelia. I am 17 and I live in Tasmania with my family. I am the youngest of 9 children in the Matuszek family. We live on a farm here in Nika. My father's name is Tad and my mother's name is Anna. Welcome to our family. Come see.
How did God lead you to marriage, and how did He help you choose your spouse?
Well, God organised my life very well. I knew your mother to say hello because when I first saw her, she worked at a credit union that was the credit union for the place where I worked. So I'd go there every payday and I knew your mother to say hello. She was in a youth group with Chocha Nuka, one of my sisters, and a few times she came round with friends to our house. And I asked my sister Anne to introduce us, and she said, "You do your own dirty work." Obviously, she's a very loving sister. We used to have private parties every month, and I wanted to invite Anna to this private party we were going to have at the coffee shop. So I asked my sister Anne for Anna's address and phone number, and she said, "Well, I have an address and phone number, but I know they've moved recently, so the address she had was an old address." I looked in the phone book, it only had the old address in the phone book, so I didn't know how to contact Anna. A couple of days later, I was at work. I worked at an employment agency, and a telex came through with some vacancies from another office, and Anna had gone in to lodge a vacancy for a beauty consultant. She worked for a cosmetic company. She'd gone in to lodge a vacancy for a beauty consultant, and I'm standing there at the telex machine, and it comes through Anna's name, address, and phone number.
Black and white.
No, I thought, well, if God's not organising my life, I don't know what's happening. So I rang Anna up. I was a bit apprehensive because I thought, well, a lovely young girl like Anna was going to have a boyfriend or have things. She probably won't be interested in me. Well, no, she was. She did say yes. She came, and as I say to people, I was unsuccessful in the job as beauty consultant, but 2 weeks later I was successful in my application as husband.
How does it feel to be the mother and father of 9 children?
Feels normal. People ask me sometimes, what's it like to have 9 children? And I said, well, they came one at a time. And each child comes along and they sort of seem to just fit in as if they're sort of God meant them to be part of our family.
How do people react when they see your family?
Most people are usually very polite and they don't say anything. And there's a lot of positive. We've had a lot of positive reactions from people actually. Never anyone putting us down. And I know my mum got a bit worried because when your dad got sick, they were a bit worried how would we look after them all, but it always worked out. And with the help of family and friends, we coped very well.
One of the great advantages of growing up on a big family was you're never really alone. You have someone to talk to, and it was fantastic growing up because I'd always talk to my friends, and they'd say, "So I was so bored over the weekend." I thought, well, how can you be bored? Then I realised that they'd only have 1 or maybe 2 siblings.
And there's always something happening, someone's birthday, some sort of celebration. I suppose you're never alone. There's always someone there to keep you company as well.
My brothers and sisters understand me better than anyone else, all our shared histories. So when we talk to each other about things that are bothering us, we don't have to explain ourselves because we all know each other so well anyway, which makes it a lot easier. And so, friends come and go, but my brothers and sisters will always be there.
are some of the biggest challenges you've faced raising a large family?
Teenagers. and when your father got sick and I had a 3-week-old baby, I just knew that I couldn't, I just had to keep going.
There are a number of things which happened which normally we wouldn't have even dreamt of being able to happen. But as a result of what happened actually 36 years ago, doing something which, in a way, God guided me to do something which common sense didn't dictate necessarily. The fruits of that guidance really came, even in a way that what we did came to fruition 30, 35, 36 years later. And also in very small things. God's provided us in other ways. I sort of sometimes wonder, because before I got sick, I had a very well-paid job. We had a very good income. We didn't have luxuries, but we sort of lived a very good, comfortable lifestyle. And people actually asked me at the time, or after I got sick, how do we cope? I said, well, we cope with what we provided with, what God provides us with. And I sometimes thought about, why did it happen? Well, when I look back now, it meant that in a way we changed the way we raised you children. You grew up in a way that you didn't have a lot of the comforts that people took for granted. So in a way, our attention was directed more to each other, probably away from materialistic things. And I remember actually asking you a few times, your children, did you ever feel poor? And each time you said, no, we didn't. So in a way, you didn't feel, we mightn't have not had a lot materially, but we were probably very rich family-wise, and the joy and the good times that we had together.
So I worked with my dad, and definitely seeing the way he worked with him a lot, seeing the way at times he really does struggle, but his persistence, and he's never down about anything. He always knows that God has a plan. You know, God's plan is best. You know, and even at times that he may be struggling or he may feel down, I can see he's always got that trust and that faith that just to persist. So I think for myself, there is that persistence, just in practicing my faith alone, just that constant persistence in practicing my faith. I know that's one thing, that's of just seeing him, seeing the way he's gone through his life. And Mum too, she has this incredible ability just to make people feel warm and welcomed. And that just her example of being like Christ, of just welcoming, you know, complete strangers, you know, people who often you may find it difficult to welcome. Mum just has this ability just to you know, welcome them and really be Christ to those people.
How do you share your faith with your children?
Take them to church every week, during the week, sometimes if we can. Pray together.
I think often it's the case that you share your faith with your children with the things that you talk about. You actually have a perspective from a faith perspective rather than just from a materialistic, worldly perspective.
What is the role of prayers and sacraments in our family, and how has the Mass and the sacraments helped us as a whole?
Always at the night time before we went to bed, we'd say prayers with your children. Remember sort of you'd sing the songs, I sung prayers and how that literally became a thing. And that's continued on now with the grandchildren as well. So that was a big part of you went to bed and you were sung and we sung and said prayers with you. We always went to Mass together. Sometimes we had to go to Mass at separate times, and for me it was really difficult not to go to Mass with Anna and with the children. It was just so strange. So the fact that we went to Mass together, I sort of think at various times as we've gone through life, God sort of pointed us in a direction that's sort of been the right thing for the right time. And it's been sort of that next little building block in our life, in our faith life, in how we grow as a family.
My faith has definitely come a long way in the last few years. Life was pretty boring. It was, just going along with life. But definitely my faith has given me reassurance and hope. So that's been one way my faith has helped me. And I know if I didn't have my faith, life wouldn't be as interesting as it is. The number of things I've done in the last year, faith-based, have been some of the most exciting things I've ever done in my life.
My parents always being very generous with us and very generous with other people really was a great example. And so when I grew up and learnt about my faith and learnt about devotions, it was not a problem for me.
So once you've had a child, you really start to see what your parents went through. And so you sort of realise how much their faith, sort of how important it is to them. And when my daughter was born and when I sent her to school, I realised how much my faith meant to me. So I think at the time, they protected us from the hardships when we were little. But when we got older and we were aware of how tough things could be, we sort of were able to look back and go, this is how it sort of happened. And now at the moment, my mum helps me a lot with all of my troubles. If I sort of, if I come along and have a bit of a whinge about something, she'll usually hand me a prayer or send me a particular photo of something, and I'll have to grudgingly admit it's the right thing at the right time that I needed.
What are the best qualities you find in each other?
Well, one of the very early in our marriage, we never really had that 2 year, the first 2 years of marriage are the toughest. I don't remember ever having that. So it must be because you have such wonderful qualities. But I remember because you went out to work, I was with the children at home. So by the time 6 o'clock came around, you were due to come home, I was ready for a break. And I'd have all sorts of worries. You'd come home, take over with one of the children, coming out of the bath, dry them, cut their toenails. And then I'd tell you my problems. And before I knew it, there weren't problems anymore at all. They just all diffused. And you're always there for the children, or when some of you were very grumpy, I didn't have this patience to sit with you when you were crying for no apparent reason. I just gave you to your father and he'd settle you down.
Anna's patience and her sort of that love she had for people around her. And she really had time for people, time to sort of to listen to them and to care for them. And that was really, it made my choice to ask her to marry me very easy, because to me, that was really what I was looking for in a mother for my children. Because that's probably one of the most important things, was having a mother who had time for the children. Because I knew as a father, I had a role to do other things, and of course you've got to go to work, you don't have all that time. And for children to really have that, to really sort of to feel that somebody cares for them, that they have a mother that really cares. It doesn't matter what happens or how, it's probably very important. It gives them that stability when they're growing up. To have a mother that's got a strong faith.
My father, he's not really a man of an affirmation kind of man, so he never really said, I love you. But I never was in any doubt of how much he loved us, because everything they ever did is for us. So that was never a problem. So even when you don't necessarily hear God talking to you, you still know. And I think that the family is the first catechism.
What was it like homeschooling us as well as teaching us discipline, values, chores and sharing with each other?
Difficult. Well, one of the reasons why we decided to homeschool your children was because it meant that we'd have a bigger part in your growing up. It meant that the values and the faith that we had, we could impart and share with you. Because what actually happens is when you go to school, to a normal school, you rush off in the morning, you come home, usually it's the case there's homework to be done, you're busy cooking tea and sort of doing homework, and apart from the odd 1 or 2 hours, that's about the only time you spend with your parents. So in a way, as parents, we felt that we actually were losing the impact we could have on our children if they went to school normally. So that was a big part of it. And then, so you shared things together because you were living together, doing things together as children, but you also were doing things together as a family. But also having sort of youth groups, Catholic-based youth groups, having the Sisters, Immaculata Sisters, those things also play a big part because not everything will come from the parents. So you actually have to sometimes hear the same thing from somebody else. So all those things played a very important part in your upbringing, in your growing up, and in the values that your children have. One of the advantages in homeschooling your children was that when we taught you, it wasn't just a case of teaching you as subjects. So you just didn't learn a subject, but you also were learning to think. You were learning to think broadly. When we had what we called the ME sessions, when you asked a question, instead of getting the 5-minute answer, you got the 1-hour answer. And the 1-hour answer is really a case of you learning how to think and how to think broadly and to be sort of more critical in your thinking. And I know that some of my brothers and sisters were sort of concerned that, and the same with Anna's brothers and sisters were concerned, how will your children cope after being homeschooled when you went onto college and onto university? Well, you or those that have gone on have done actually quite well. So I think the advantage was that you actually learned to think rather than just sort of having a narrow approach to a topic, to a subject. And obviously that has sort of helped you to go on to do further study, to get your degrees.
How are each of your children unique and what are their talents and gifts?
It's very hard to think actually how each child is unique because to me, each child is just sort of part of the family. So in a way, I suppose it's a case of really thinking about it. I probably would have to think back to things that have happened. I think back actually when one time your mother went away to visit her sisters, and Kaja would have been about 10 or 11, and she was so keen to fill the role of being a mother. She wanted to help, and would mum do this and would mum do that. She was really like a little mother to your children because you were all sort of very young children. Kaja, in a way, to me, is a person who's a deep thinker. She thinks through a lot of things.
I want to say with Ellie, but not that you others don't think that you're like that too, but it's lovely when Ellie comes around and have a good conversation, and it's just nice to have you, and it's always a pleasure. And you come in all grumpy at something, and, and the lovely thing about you can never stay grumpy for long. You try, but you don't, and that's lovely. And you've had a lot of things thrown at you and you've always stayed above, and it's very good. You've all managed to get over it and stay relatively happy.
Stefan, he was the only child to give your mother blood pressure problems. And Stefan was a pest.
No, but he was fair. He treated everyone equally.
But he was a wonderful
Teachers,
pest.
everyone equally.
God works in mysterious yet marvellous ways, but the mysterious part was, why did God call a pest to the priesthood?
We've never had a happier, kinder child as Samuel. And
Brings joys to ladies.
He does. And when he's not happy, oh my goodness, the world stops because you're always happy. Oh, Dominique, you're the storm. But you always work things out. You always work things out, which is very good. Which is good. And always very sensible solutions. And you've had lovely friends, and I've never had to worry, even though you seem to be worried about how you're going to do this, and you think, oh my goodness, what now? But you always work it out well. Hopefully it's because I call on Jesus to help me. Edwina.
The determination, that strong determination to see things through. Zelia. She had that real liveliness, that joy, that full of life approach to living, and it was just great to have around. The fact that each child is different. I remember my father saying, I grew up in a family of 6 children, Anna grew up in a family of 6 children, and I remember my father saying that each child is different. And as a parent, you actually treat each child as an individual, as a different person. So you can't treat every child the same. And the funny thing is that often the older children, you children have sort of said to us, oh, we're not telling Zelia this and telling her that. Well, I said, well, the trouble is you tell her before we get a chance. So if I had to tell her as well, we'd be doing too much telling. But that's actually part of growing up as a family as well, that you all look out for yourself as well.
Shalom World brings to you the Catholic faith in all its different dimensions. It can be a faith to inspire you in your own living of your Catholic life in society. Shalom World offers you an opportunity of being enriched and strengthened in your family life. We live in a culture that needs to have a Catholic presence. We live in a culture that needs to be evangelized by the presence of Catholic teaching and the inspiration to live according to our Catholic way of life. I recommend to you to be involved in the work of Shalom World. May the Lord bless you and bless the work of Shalom World. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Shalom World, God's own channel.